What I'm about to talk about today is nothing new, however I do think it's important, especially right now in Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. Have we had enough crossovers? It's a question that comes up whenever Final Fantasy XIV does one of these things. But is it time for Square Enix to move away from this? Is it a crutch or a core part of 14's identity? Let's get into it and let's talk about it. Hello everyone, I am Jmulls, and we have a lot to talk about. So I wanted to start this video off with a list of what I perceive to be pros for crossovers in Final Fantasy XIV, and I think the recent Alliance raid is a good example of this. While I don't think the whole story associated with the Alliance raid is anything to really write home about, I think it's serviceable and fine. I think the beauty of the environments, how cool the fights are, and just the overall fantastical feel that Echoes of Vana'diel has had so far, I do think that is worth something. And you could argue that you could get that same vibe by doing original content, and I do agree with you there. But I don't necessarily take issue with the idea of doing something based on another Final Fantasy game and incorporating that into Final Fantasy XIV. The main thing, funnily enough, that I take issue with when it comes to Echoes of Vana'diel is that FF11 isn't also a part of the Final Fantasy XIV subscription fee. Because if it was, I have been sufficiently intrigued by Echoes of Vana'diel that I would like to go out and maybe dabble in FF11, but not for a separate subscription. I think it's also just a really cool idea in a game that has so much emphasis on collecting music, whether it concerns the equestrian role you have in your inn, or even in your house, and what music you play as background there. Being able to collect music from other games and incorporating that into Final Fantasy XIV, I do think has some cool pros to it. I am a massive fan of Nier. Nier Automata is my favorite game of all time, so you can imagine I was rather excited when we had the Yorha Dark Apocalypse raids announced and then brought into the game. Now, not everyone likes them, but personally speaking, they're my favorite Alliance raids because I'm just that big of a Nier fan. I would say I prefer the Stormblood Ivalice raids mechanically speaking, but when it comes to overall vibe, glamour, as well as story, I prefer the Nier ones. That is directly a crossover with Square Enix's other titles with Nier. And I can also completely understand how maybe a lot of people out there don't vibe with the aesthetic of Nier and think it clashes a lot with Final Fantasy XIV. And while Final Fantasy XIV's aesthetic has been, let's call it malleable throughout the years, I don't think that's necessarily justification for throwing whatever you want into the pot and hoping all the flavors meld together. Do I mind it when it concerns stuff that I like? Obviously no, because I like it. I love Nier Automata, I love Nier Replicant. I'm intrigued by the concept of Drakengard if they would release modern ports of the freaking series. I love the Nier raids. The ending was a bit weak, story-wise, but I really enjoyed all three of those raids. I spend time going back to rerun those to get all the minions, to get the music, to get quite a bit of glamour there. And I can imagine quite a few people out there have that same experience when it comes to the Echoes of Vana'diel raids we have right now. I'm sure there's a bunch of massive Final Fantasy XI fans where they grew up on that game, and the idea to be able to revisit it in the game they now play and to reacquaint with themselves a lot of those aesthetics, pieces of gear, and those locations and characters, I can imagine that'd be a really cool experience. I have never played Final Fantasy XI, so I don't get any of that when it comes to the Alliance raid series now, and I imagine I'm not alone in that. I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of modern Final Fantasy XIV players have never even picked up Final Fantasy XI before. I'm also a big fan of Final Fantasy IX, and yeah, a large part of Dawntrail has been a massive reference to Final Fantasy IX with Alexandria. Heck, Queen's Fiend is essentially a giant reference to Garnet from Final Fantasy IX. Now, she's not like a one-for-one character, anything like that. It's not like 2B in the Nier raids, right? But there are a lot of similarities there, including in the job that she is, which is essentially an Arcanist, whereas in FF9, Garnet was your summoner. Now, for better or for worse, I do not think Dawntrail is entirely reliant on being an FF9 reference. The references that are there are largely just visual, and they don't change your perspective on the story going on in a meaningful degree, in my opinion. You may hear the odd piece of music or the odd reference, like the bar being in the new dungeon, but unless I'm just forgetting something, it's not like you're going to completely not understand understand the story or character motivations if you haven't played FF9. And look, I understand people can be rather split on their opinions about Dawntrail, but I think when you look at it solely through the perspective of how should Final Fantasy XIV do crossovers, I think the way they tackled FF9 was rather well done. For a lot of us FF9 fans, we looked at Otis and said, oh, that's Steiner. But if you haven't played FF9, I don't really think your opinions of Otis would really change. That can be said with a lot of Dawntrail. I think that's the best way to go about incorporating a lot of these crossovers, especially when it comes to like other Final Fantasy games, is have the references be just fun, but not be mandatory to understand what's going on here. And don't allow a crossover to exist to where it feels as if it's taking away real estate and time that could have been spent and utilized to develop Final Fantasy XIV as its own entity. That's where I think a lot of people become really disinterested with the idea of crossovers, going back to like the Nier raids, going back to like the way they did the Ivalice raids, the way we have the Echoes of Vana'diel stuff. A lot of this stuff feels like it serves just as fan service for fans of those other entries instead of fans of Final Fantasy XIV. And when you're playing Final Fantasy XIV, that can rub people the wrong way. But if you are a fan of those series, then yeah, that fan service can be rather fun. But speaking on that idea, let's elaborate more on that. Let's talk about the cons of crossovers.
I will illuminate you.
Final Fantasy XIV as a game, for each of its expansions, is rather structured. You get your main story, and then with each new patch, you get new main story alongside that. You have a core raid series, you have an alliance raid series, you used to have a trial series, but we don't need to talk about that right now. Oh, how I miss those though. And then you can have the occasional odd event, like how we had the Yokai Watch event or the Dragon Quest event. But when you think about it, the chance and opportunity to flesh out the world of Final Fantasy XIV can be rather limited in terms of opportunities per expansion. You also have your Beast Tribe / Allied Society, whatever they want to call them for this expansion, or if they want to change the name for the next expansion. In a lot of ways per patch, the amount of time to expand and develop the world is rather limited. So when Square Enix chooses to essentially take a giant chunk of that content and have it served to just be fan service for another series, that can be disappointing for people that want to see more of Final Fantasy XIV when they're playing Final Fantasy XIV, and I think that's a completely reasonable position to feel and to take. You can argue the Stormblood Ivalice raids were fleshing out the world of Final Fantasy XIV because that is just a location in FF14 now, but that story doesn't really hit that hard if you haven't played FF12 and especially Tactics. I knew I was largely disinterested with it when I was playing through it because I didn't play those games yet, and I still haven't played Tactics yet. When it comes to Echoes of Vana'diel, like what are we really getting here? We're getting Cirilja lore, cool. An excuse to see Bakul Jaja, that's cool for the absolutely traumatizing pieces of art that I've seen over the last year or so, oh my god. But like, instead of really fleshing out this entire new location we're at, instead we're taking a giant piece of content that is story heavy and sectioning it off just to be a bunch of cool references for people that have played a game from over 20 years ago. Yeah, it's still updated a little bit, but you get my point. And that's not a knock on FF11 or if you're a fan of these crossovers. Like I said, I was a big fan of the Nier raids because I'm a big fan of Nier. But if you're not a member of that small demographic that piece of content is targeting, it can feel as if the expansion is offering almost less. And I do think when we're talking about an MMORPG, that does have importance to it. The value proposition for your subscription fee and for your time and your overall emotional investment, yeah, that does matter. Like, imagine if instead of Echoes of Vana'diel, we had an Alliance raid series where we were delving into various ancient tombs or ancient structures and learning more about the ancient civilizations across Tural, fleshing out that part of the world and making it feel like the cool Indiana Jones style adventure a lot of us were wanting out of Dawntrail but never really got. You can look just back onto Endwalker. We had an entire Alliance raid series about the gods of Eorzea, and I can't speak for anyone else, but I rather enjoyed them. I think the story did kind of drop off near the end there, though that's more of an issue with execution than the overall idea of the concept of telling an original story that fleshes out the world of Final Fantasy XIV with the alliance raids, but I know when a lot of people were excited when that piece of content was announced, because a lot of us were thinking, oh cool, we're going to be fleshing out the world of Final Fantasy XIV again, instead of using this giant piece of content to provide fan service to people that are fans of another series.
I will illuminate you.
So what's my main takeaway? I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do crossovers when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV. I don't think there's ever any way to completely get rid of them. At this point, I think crossovers are a core part of Final Fantasy XIV's identity, in the same way they are to like Smash Bros. Obviously not to the same degree or scale, but Final Fantasy XIV, in a lot of ways, is a love letter to Final Fantasy and to other Square Enix games at times. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just when you're going to incorporate a crossover, my opinion, have it be a fun side event that's extra to everything else, or don't have that crossover exist just to be fan service and to replace what could be cool and interesting world building for the world of Final Fantasy XIV. Don't let that crossover exist in a way to where you feel as if you need information or experience with that other entry, with that other IP, in order to appreciate what is there in FF14. I think the Eden raids with how they incorporated FF8 stuff was really good. I haven't beaten FF8, so I don't get a lot of those references, but I still thought a lot of those encounters and music cues and the story that happened there was really cool and engaging, and it fleshed out a part of the world of Final Fantasy XIV in a way that felt additive to Final Fantasy XIV. I know a lot of people don't like Dawn Trail, but I think the way they tackled FF9 stuff was rather competent, and I don't think your opinion of Dawn Trail is like made or broken based on prior knowledge of FF9. Maybe it's enhanced? Sure. But I don't think it's contingent upon knowing FF9. Now, granted, when they do a crossover like Echoes of Vana'diel, I don't think it's like the end of the world or anything like that. It's just make sure that even if you haven't played that content outside of Final Fantasy XIV, that it's perfectly enjoyable and additive as an overall experience to FF14, and helps flesh out the world or various characters. Granted, I don't think the Echoes of Vana'diel story is anything to write home about, and I don't think it's particularly mind-blowing or extravagant or anything like that. But I do like that it's addressing Cirilja as a villain and Bakul Jaja as a character and giving them a reason to have screen time. I think that's rather cool. Again, could be executed better, but I like the underlying idea. And I think at the end of the day, your opinion of a lot of these crossovers will be completely contingent upon whether or not you have played those games or not. For instance, if you're a massive Kingdom Hearts fan and they announce the next Alliance Raid series in 8.0 is Kingdom Hearts based, I can imagine you would be super excited and stoked. But if you're not, I can imagine people going, oh, that's cringe. Dude, why are we doing Kingdom Hearts? You know the experiences you would see online, right? Like, we all understand how a lot of people would react to this. And we will all be completely ready that if we ever get a raid series based on Final Fantasy VII, that I'm gonna be over the moon because I'm a big fan and lover of Final Fantasy VII. At the end of the day, people are going to want what makes their individual experience better. And if a crossover hits for them, they're not gonna care that it doesn't particularly hit for anyone else. At least most of the time. But I think if we're able to take a step back and look at what's probably more healthy for the overall state of the game, I think there are better ways and worse ways at incorporating crossovers into Final Fantasy XIV. I don't think the answer is to just get rid of them all wholesale and never do them again. I do think they're part of the charm of Final Fantasy XIV. It's just, you gotta do them well and you gotta do them right. And in my opinion, find a way to either further develop the world or key characters that we already know and care about because of Final Fantasy XIV through those crossovers.
I will illuminate you.
So here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with what has been your favorite crossover in Final Fantasy XIV and what was it? Was it the Dragon Quest event? Was it Final Fantasy XVI related? Is it Echoes of Vana'diel? Was it the Nier raids? Are you a member of the Nier Brain Rot squad like I am? Glory to mankind! Are you a big Tactics fan and did you just love the Evil East raids? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. And if you want to be up to date with all things Final Fantasy XIV, you should leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter, Jmulls. G have a Discord in the description down below. And we largely talked about the past in Final Fantasy XIV here. But let's talk about the future and where I think this story is going to go from here. Let's talk about the fall, some say autumn, of Final Fantasy XIV. And if you want to find out more about that, you should check out this video right here. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.